Hi, this is Charles Eldermeyer, talking to you from Cornell out here in Ithaca, New York. Tonight we have a real special, today we have a really special occasion to talk with Dr. Erick Greene about the entire Montana Osprey project and the happenings that have been going on here at the Hellgate Nest. We're going to start off the hour by letting Erick sort of introduce a lot of stuff about the project, give you some updates, talk a little bit about why the cam's there. Then we'll move into a more open question and answer session, at which point we'll be feeding questions that you guys are posting to Twitter or on Facebook to Erick live. We definitely will not be able to get to all your questions, so we apologize in advance if we don't. However, we will be planning to post this in its entirety, hopefully by early next week, so anybody can watch it or use it again or share it with your friends who are Osprey fans. Also, we may try and address these other questions that we don't get to possibly in a future podcast that might be done by the Montana Osprey Project. So for the next hour or so, we'll have Dr. Erick Greene at our disposal, and I encourage you to ask some good questions, and we'll see if we can get to as many of them as we can today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Erick Greene from the University of Montana. Go ahead, Erick.
All right. Thanks, Charles and Holly. Thanks for helping organize this. And yeah, hello to all the Cyber Osprey fans out there. So yeah, this was a sad event for all of us who are so attached to Stanley and Iris. But I wanted to, in addition to answering a lot of the great questions that you folks are sending in, just put this event in a little bit more perspective. And so before we get going with detailed answers to specific questions, I just wanted to give a little bit more of an overview about Ospreys in general and Iris and Stanley specifically, and a little bit about what we're trying to do with our Osprey project and how this camera fits into the big picture. So, this was really dramatic. In all the years that I've been studying Ospreys, I've never seen hailstorm take out eggs. I know it does happen other places, and the only reason we know that these eggs were damaged by hail is because we've got the camera up, right? If we hadn't had the camera watching, we wouldn't have known it. And from the ground, so I've been over to the nest several times since last Sunday. From the ground up until about yesterday, I would have never have guessed that anything was wrong with the eggs, because Iris was basically sitting on the nest a lot of the time in sort of incubation posture. I have been getting reports from other people around the world that hail has taken out other osprey nests. And, these sort of summer thunderstorms that do come through are, as you saw, they can be incredibly intense. I think it's probably more common that entire nests get blown down by these cumulonimbus, these thunderstorms that move through. So I know of quite a few nests around here, eagle nests as well as ospreys and others, that get just taken out by the winds. And we almost saw that actually at this nest. If you look at the video of the hailstorm carefully, about halfway in, the wind was gusting in the canyon to over 60 miles an hour for a bit there. And Iris and Stanley are doing everything they can just to kind of hold on. But you can see at one point that the nest, a lot of the sticks actually lift up. And that was one of these really intense gusts at the peak of the storm. And, the whole nest almost blew off. We do have great big spikes from the bottom of the platform that kind of anchor the sticks. But nonetheless, the wind almost took out the nest. A lot of people have asked about damage to other nests in the area, and we've been around to other nests, and again, I've looked under a bunch of nests and haven't seen any eggshells underneath them, but they've been eating the eggshells, and sometimes they don't end up. So, and There's birds on the nest, and most of them that I've looked at. So, but it could be that other birds lost their eggs too in the area. But I think the good thing is that if we look at the radar tracks from this particular storm, it was a really, really intense but pretty narrow, fast-moving front that moved through. So the swath of destruction of this particular one cloud was probably less than half a mile wide, if that. It was very, very narrow. So that's a bit of information about that particular storm. And let me just say a little bit more about osprey natural history in general. Ospreys can live a fairly long time, and they only need to produce 2 chicks that survive and go on to breed during their entire lifetime to replace themselves, to ensure sort of a stable population. And so ospreys are really built, these long-lived birds and other animals, they're adapted to withstand a few bad years like this. So, and if you think about it, we've really been spoiled by Iris and Stanley because they're such amazing parents that this is the first year in our entire study that they've had a failure. Okay, every single year before this that we know about, they've brought off chicks successfully. So they're a remarkably successful pair, and we're just we assume that they're gonna do fine. My big concern, my worry this year was that how they would handle this construction of this new Missoula College. And so, as you know, from those of you who've followed the Facebook and the postings there, we've worked very, very closely with the university planners and architects and the university president and the construction company, and they've all been great and changed the way they're doing the building project just to accommodate and minimize stress on Stanley and Iris. And to be honest, I didn't know how it was going to work out. I thought they might have abandoned the nest, but as you see, they now they couldn't give a hoot about the construction. So I was worried about the wrong thing maybe early on. But let me just give you a little bit of perspective on Iris and Stanley. So this particular nest platform was erected in November of 2007. Iris used to nest over on the crossbars where that really scary fake owl is, where they like to eat the fish. And that was dangerous because they had sticks that close to live wires, and they could have been electrocuted and cause fires and short out transformers and things like that. So in 2007, the present platform was put up. It was a great project by Karen Wagner, who's the daughter of a woman who was a patient in the Riverside Health Center, Kate Davis, who's the director of Raptors of the Rockies, and the health center itself, and also Northwest Energy really has been instrumental in getting that platform up. So Iris is bred. So the next year she jumped immediately over onto this new platform, and so this is her 8th year on this platform, and she bred for at least 4 years that we know about on the power poles. And since she probably didn't start breeding until she was 3 or 4 years old, Iris, we don't have her banded and as a chick, so we don't know how old she is, but she's at least probably 15 or 16 years old is my guess, possibly older. And she's raised about 25 chicks. She's successfully fledged about 25 chicks in those years. And so that's pretty remarkable. She's been a real productive mom, a great mother. And if you assume that about 50% of chicks survive the first year, which is our best estimates, that means probably around, and then after the first year, if chicks survive the first year, their survivorship goes up a lot once they figure out how to be an osprey. So Iris is probably already added, she's probably already got 8, maybe 10 chicks that have survived and have started breeding on their own. So remember, I said that an osprey pair really only has to contribute 2 chicks that go on and survive to breed. Um, Iris is a champion. She's probably got 8 to 10 kids who are out there breeding now. So that, for me, it was really sad watching this, and for me, that kind of helps put this in perspective. Iris has already done her duty to ospreydom, and but she keeps trying. I just wanted to say a few more words about ospreys as environmental sentinels, what they tell us, why they're such a great species to tell us about the environment, what's going on around us, and a little bit of an overview of our Montana Osprey project and how this camera fits into all this. So ospreys are really great environmental canaries, so to speak, because they're top of the food chain in aquatic systems. They're eating big fish that eat smaller fish that eat a lot more smaller fish, and so on. So if there's contaminants in rivers and lakes and streams, they get concentrated up the food chain. So ospreys are sitting at the very top of the aquatic food chain, and so that's why we take blood samples and feather samples from the chicks. If there are contaminants in aquatic systems that we might be concerned about, by looking at things at the very top of the food chain, it kind of integrates the whole aquatic system underneath them. And we started this project. So this project was started by a couple partners in crime. Rob Domenech, who's here in Missoula, who's the executive director of Raptor View Research. And he's a world expert in raptor migration and conservation and ecology. And Heiko Langner, who was here for many years, who's the environmental chemist on the project, who's now doing similar things, heading up a really big lab in Saudi Arabia. So those are the folks involved in this project. And the Clark Fork River, just about a mile upstream or so of where the Hellgate nest is, that was one of the largest EPA Superfund sites in the country. There was a dam, Milltown Dam, and about 120 miles or so upriver from Missoula is Butte, Montana, which there was a lot of copper mining that went on there. And so the last 100 years or so, there's been a lot of real toxic heavy metals from the old historic mining that have washed down. So in local communities, folks couldn't drink the water because the arsenic levels were so high and things like that. So there's been a huge restoration project in the river, and one of the main reasons we're looking at ospreys all along the river, from here all the way up to the source of the heavy metals, is to try to get an idea using the ospreys of how successful the restoration of the river has been. The good news is the heavy metals. So we're monitoring about 200 osprey nests in lots of places in the Clark Fork River and other places. And the good news is that the levels of the heavy metals are really low. And so that's fantastic. The arsenic and cadmium, zinc, lead, and copper are the ones that we've been concentrating on. Those are at really good levels. What we've discovered, and this wasn't on anybody's radar when we started this project, is that mercury levels are really high. And so we've spent a lot of time figuring out where that mercury is coming from and what the effects are. And mercury is probably having a pretty negative impact in some areas on some of the ospreys, as well as being a health concern for humans, because people are eating a lot of the same fish, trout and things that the ospreys are getting the mercury from. And the good news there too is that this osprey project has got the state, people in the state government really concerned about these high mercury levels, and they're now starting to really seriously investigate how to get rid of those sources of mercury, which is from old gold and silver mines. All right, so our Montana Osprey project is, we really focus on ospreys, what they can tell us about the environment, but we also do a lot of basic research, but also public education is a huge part of this. So we take out lots and lots of kids to see ospreys and learn about the rivers all around them that are so important here in the arid West. And by the end of this summer, we will have taken out about, it's getting up over 30,000 people in Montana and let them see ospreys up close and personal and learn about the rivers and so forth. So these ospreys have been just absolutely fantastic. People love ospreys. You guys love ospreys. And this Hellgate Osprey Cam is part of that education. It's a really, really effective way for us all to learn about a lot more about osprey behavior and ecology. And I've got to say, I thought I knew a lot about ospreys until we put this camera up, and I've learned so much from Iris and Stanley, and they give us a very, very intimate view of the trials and tribulations of a wildlife species, what the sorts of things that they have to put up with year to year. All right, let me answer one question that a lot of you have asked, and then Charles and Holly are going to feed me questions that you have asked as well. But probably the number one question that's been coming in has been, will Iris and Stanley try to breed again this year? And the answer is no. And the reason is, well, it's a little bit too late. If they were to lay eggs again, the earliest they could lay them would be a while, and it's just too late in the season. So the chicks wouldn't fledge until way late, pretty late in the fall. Probably the most important reason that they're not going to breed again is you've noticed that although Stanley has attempted to mate with Iris a couple times, she's just not interested. And the reason here is that because of her reproductive physiology, female birds, basically their reproductive system, their ovaries go to sleep for the winter. They don't need them. They get really small. They shut down. And when Iris was down on her wintering grounds, environmental cues, mainly photo period, were getting her body ready for breeding. And so all of her reproductive hormones were changing. So by the time she got up here, her body was ready to produce eggs and mate and so forth. But as soon as she starts incubating, her hormones completely change. Her ovaries have shut down, gone to sleep for the season, and so she's just not in physiological condition to breed. And I don't know of any ospreys re-nesting this late in the season. So they're done for the season, and we can tell. Iris and Stanley spent a lot of time on the nest the last few days. They were there this morning. They're spending less time on the nest today, and so they're done for the season. All right, I'll take a breath and pass it over to Charles to help me with questions.
Great, Eric. That was a really great summary. And just to remind everybody, if you're just tuning in, this is Dr. Erick Greene. He's the director of the Montana Osprey Project, and that's the group that we collaborate with to bring this great view of the Hellgate Canyon Osprey Cam every year for the last, I think this would be our 4th year now, Eric, working together, which is great. So we have a list of questions that cover a lot of different topics that have been submitted since we announced that this live chat was going to happen, which is only yesterday. So I'm going to start working my way through these questions. Meanwhile, we are checking online in Facebook and on Twitter for questions that you might have for Dr. Greene. You can tweet us at Hellgate Osprey, one word, Hellgate Osprey, or throw it up on one of the Facebook pages, either the Bird Cams page or the Montana Osprey Cams page. So I think we're going to start out maybe asking a few questions about the eggs, because really, that was probably one of the most dramatic things that's happened in these last few days once the hailstorm hit. And one question that has come up a number of times relates to how Iris decided that an egg was no longer viable? Or how does it know that this unhatched chick isn't alive or in the egg, and that it's time to dispose of it? And sort of going along with that, during that disposal process, we did see both Stan and Iris consuming the contents of those eggshells. And so, could you comment a little bit on sort of what might be driving that process, both of awareness and then why they go ahead and eat these eggs?
Yeah, those are really great questions, and they've got really simple answers. I have no idea. No, they're really interesting questions that I don't know the answer to. And it's interesting because if you think about it, the other really sad thing to me was the timing of this hailstorm. Those eggs were so close to hatching. The oldest egg would have been hatching today or really, really soon. So they almost made it. But if you think about it, when the eggs start to hatch, what happens? There's cracks and there's holes in the egg, and the osprey parents, Iris and Stanley, don't throw the eggs out or eat the chicks, or they're very attentive parents. So there's something different about an egg that's been damaged, that's cracked, by the hail, because those hail punctures and the cracks look very, very similar to what the eggs look like when they're starting to hatch. So that's a great question. They obviously behave very, very differently to a damaged egg. And what I guess my guess would be is that when the chicks are hatching, when the eggs are hatching, they're actually very, very vocal. The chicks are making a lot of sounds. They're talking to their parents through the eggs for several days before they hatch. So those of you who might remember previous years, we saw Iris bending down and actually making sounds, talking to the eggs several days before they hatched. And so I suspect there's a lot of cues, sound cues, as well as if there's a hole as the chicks are hatching, the little chick's beak is moving around, and so there's visual cues. But it's a great question. Clearly, they know that an egg with a hole in it with a dead embryo is something that is not going to hatch, and they get rid of it. But it's a great question. We have no idea, or I have no idea. The other issue about why they ate the contents of the eggs is another good one that I don't know. And it's interesting, if chicks die after they hatch, the parents generally don't eat those chicks. They push them off to the side of the nest or throw them out, but they rarely eat the chicks if they die after they hatch. So there's something different there too, that I don't know about, we don't know about. But it's a little hard to watch them eating the dead embryos, but it is recycling nutrients in a way, and the eggshells especially are calcium, and so that's an element that they really need a lot of too. So we don't know, but those are great questions.
Great, thanks for that, Eric. This is one that's come up a lot and is being asked as we speak here, and it's nothing that you can comment on necessarily as a scientist, and it's one that we've briefly mentioned whether or not to even treat in this interview. But since there's so many people asking, I do want to ask, sort of, in your opinion, maybe, I don't even know as a scientist, but as a person, as you watch birds or ospreys, I mean, you've studied many different kinds of birds. When there's a loss like this, do you ever interpret their behavior following a loss like this in any kind of as an emotional response? Is there a way that you view is there a way for science to really even get at whether or not these birds are feeling emotions like grieving or loss? Because it's coming up a lot. I think it'd be a good thing for us to just put out there maybe from a scientific perspective, and then if you have a personal perspective, you can share that too.
Yeah, that's a great question, and there are it's very, very hard. So if I put my science scientist hat on, I would say that it's hard for us to get into the mind of any other species, really, and and imagine what they must be sensing and feeling. So I think it's impossible for us to right now sort of figure out what feelings ospreys have. Do they have a sense of elation when they grab a great big fish? It might be pretty exciting for them. So I guess I'm uncomfortable with trying to say anything about emotions or what they might be feeling, just since it's hard to get inside their heads. There are people who do study animal emotions and sort of more issues of psychology and cognition. Now, taking off my scientist hat and putting on my own personal hat, I'm absolutely sure that animals like ospreys have feelings and emotions and keen senses of perception. We do know that. And it's interesting just watching Iris the last few days. I mean, and again, this is being anthropomorphic, and me viewing her behavior through my human lenses, my human emotional lenses. But she did kind of seem despondent, just kind of hanging out and incubating, in an incubating posture when she had no eggs. It's impossible for me to say what either of them were feeling, but they're obviously changing their behaviors drastically in response to this. Sort of related to this, and I know this is a question you were probably going to ask right off the bat next, Charles, but I'll run right into it, and this question has been asked by a lot of folks too, is whether I thought that this event, losing their eggs, might cause them to split up as a pair and seek other mates, or choose another place to nest, and so forth. And that's a really interesting question. Even though ospreys and a lot of animals and other birds are really long-lived and tend to, we say, mate for life, but there is divorce in the animal world, and there's divorce in the osprey world, and it tends to happen after a reproductive failure. So if there's a pair, even if they've been together for a while, but something happens and all their babies die, we tend to see spikes in humans we would call divorce, the pair separating and seeking new partners. And that makes sense in some ways, and we actually see that in humans as well. Divorce rates are a bit higher for couples who have lost children in some cases. And it kind of makes sense, because if there's something, the pair, to be successful together, they have to be on the same wavelength. They have to coordinate so much stuff. Iris and Stanley have to be so well coordinated in what they do to bring off chicks successfully. And if a pair just isn't well coordinated, that you could imagine might cause them not to be as successful raising babies. So maybe, looking for another partner that you can work with better might be better. So I was really interested in the days after the hailstorm, when they had no more eggs. I was really interested to see their behavior, to get a sense of how they were kind of relating to each other. And I've got to say, I was pretty encouraged and moved. I was touched by the last couple days. When Iris was spending a lot of time on the nest, Stanley was bringing in a lot of fish, and he was ripping up the fish and very delicately feeding Iris, and she was taking it from him. And those are behaviors that we see in courtship, and or pair bonding. So young birds that are just sort of still dating and forming a pair bond, they do a lot of that. The male feeding the female early on in courtship behavior every year, they do a lot of that. And so the fact that both Iris and Stanley were spending a fair amount of time together, kind of reinforcing their pair bond, sort of indicates to me that they might, be committed to their pair bond, and making it work, making this work as a couple down the road as well. So they're still hanging around, even though they're not spending as much time today on the nest. They're still around. I see them flying up and down the river. They're not tied to the nest now, obviously, that they don't have eggs, but I hope, I suspect that they will, if they survive this next winter, they'll come back and give it another go next year.
That's great, Eric. If you're just joining us right now, we're about halfway through the hour. We're speaking with Dr. Erick Greene from the University of Montana, a leader of the Montana Osprey Cams project, the Montana Osprey Project, which we collaborate on this cam with here at the Cornell Lab. I think it's good maybe for us to transition a little bit to talking about what's happening right now. You were just talking about what Stan and Iris were doing right now and that you're still seeing them. And we have a couple questions about them. And one is, do we know how much longer they'll continue to use the nest as sort of a focal point to continue their relationship and, of course, to allow us all to watch on cam? Do you have any sense of what might happen there?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. And as I said before, we've been spoiled by Iris and Stanley in that, Iris has been successfully breeding at this nest for 8 years. So this is the first time we've ever had this happen here. I suspect that they'll stick around. This is their nest and they want to defend it against other ospreys, but they'll probably spend less and less time at the nest, and they certainly have no reason to spend a lot of time at it now. But I also suspect that they'll migrate early, that they'll just sometime we'll just not see them anymore. And I don't know how early that will be. And so, Charles, you and I have talked about this, but we plan on leaving the camera active, certainly as long as they're around, and probably longer because the building is going up now, and that'll be very interesting to monitor the construction of the building next to it. But this is new uncharted waters for all of us, so it'll be very interesting. I'll be taking a lot of behavioral notes to see how their behavior changes and how long they stick around.
That's a great segue into another question sort of about the present, which is it sounds like there's not a lot of maybe published research on what happens necessarily on this level of detail, like with so much that we see with cams. They sort of open our eyes to the very fine details that might be happening every moment in this, constant observation. And are there things that is there any research into that you know of, or have read or come across maybe for other species following nest failure? And is there anything interesting that you think might come from us all continuing to observe the camera?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've been in the fortunate position that I haven't really had to consider that up until now. Again, just because we've been so spoiled by Iris and Stanley, because they have been so successful. So the sorts of research questions I've been focusing on haven't had to do so much with what do birds like ospreys do after nest failures. I'm sure that a lot of people that there's a lot of information out there about that, but I don't know too much about it.
That's totally understandable. As you said, we've been very lucky. Focusing for a second on Stanley, this is something that you and I have talked about a little bit, but one watcher asks if you might be able to tell us more about Stanley and his crazy feather. It's something that I've been able to show, my own 3 and 5 year old can tell Stanley from Iris, from that feather alone when they're on the nest. And I wonder if you might share a little bit of your insight about why that feather is there and why it persists. You know, the
Yeah,
first time I
yeah,
saw it, I thought it was just an errant primary, and the next year we'd
yeah.
see a nice flush bird, and that wasn't the case.
Yeah, exactly. So we're kind of lucky at this nest. We didn't plan this, obviously, but since neither bird is marked in any way, so in a lot of ospreys, it would be pretty hard, if not impossible, to tell the individuals apart. Iris is so distinctive with that's where we got her name with the her very dramatic pigment patterns in her iris, so we know it's her every year. But Stanley is an interesting guy. He showed up. He's Iris's at least her second mate. The mate she had a number of years ago was killed. We don't know exactly how, but I kind of strongly suspect that he got entangled with bald eagles that nest right around the corner. He had a bunch of great big puncture wounds from big talons in him. And then Stanley showed up a number of years ago. And as you said, the first year, he was a scrappy, scrawny, pencil neck geek kind of guy. I mean, his feathers looked pretty beat up, and especially that primary on his right wing. And like you, I thought he had damaged it somehow, maybe flown into a branch or something, and broken that feather off at a weird angle. And I just assumed that the next year he came back, and so they molt their flight feathers once a year. And I assumed that when he came back, if he did come back, it wouldn't be at that weird angle. But lo and behold, every year he comes back, it grows out in that funky way. So what that indicates is feathers grow out of follicles. So here's a ballpoint pen, and you can think of the feather shaft as the pen part, but in the wing there's the sort of socket, and all these sockets are all lined up along a wing, and the new feathers sort of grow out of those every year. And so what is that strange angle indicates to me is that that one feather socket from which that primary grows every year is at a weird angle. And so he either maybe damaged that as a young bird, maybe as a chick or something. His wing got damaged, or maybe just developmentally, when he was even inside the egg growing up as an embryo, there was some sort of developmental hiccup in which that one socket is at a weird angle. But it's great for us, isn't it? Because it gives us a very distinctive way to recognize him. So we know it's Stanley every single year. And it's kind of cool now because Stanley is such a local celebrity that I can be walking around downtown, and the Clark Fork River runs right through Missoula. And Stanley is so well known locally that I'll just overhear people looking up in the air and saying, "Oh, there's Stanley flying over." So he's very recognizable by just a lot of people here in Missoula because of his weird feather.
That's awesome. Yeah, he deserves to be a local celebrity given how well he fishes. It's pretty impressive.
That's right.
One question that's been asked a lot, both prior in the lead up to this chat and even now during the chat, involves something that's been happening on the East Coast. I'm not sure if you've read much about this, Eric, but it involves fostering osprey eggs and chicks, moving around chicks and eggs from places where they're not successful to where they could be successful, so replacing non-viable eggs or nests that are in the process of failing perhaps with young birds from other nests that have failed for a different reason. In particular, the Chesapeake Conservancy apparently is one group that's been working on this. And we wondered, or people are wondering, given how great Stan and Iris are as parents, whether or not the Montana Osprey Project, whether or not that would be part of what you guys would consider happening at this nest that has such a devoted group of followers, and we already know that the adults are great parents. And so I just wanted to give you a chance to respond to that idea.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me just say a few things about those other sorts of studies. Um, some of those studies sort of pioneered by Alan Poole, was at Cornell University, um, and others were done for a variety of reasons. Some of which were asking very specific sort of research questions having to do with clutch sizes, the energetic cost to parents of raising, say, one chick versus four chicks, things like that, and other projects that involve moving either eggs or chicks around have been sort of more management in areas where people are either trying to reestablish osprey populations or there were specific problems in specific areas. Um, so that being said, I mean, it has been done before, moving chicks and eggs around. Um, uh, we we're not in the business of sort of micromanaging any specific osprey nests in our studies. These are wild. This is wildlife. It's hard to sort of appreciate that sometimes because we get so attached to Stanley and Iris, but they're wild animals living right in our midst. We're fortunate with the camera to be such a part of their lives, or have them um, share a lot of the intimate details of their lives. Um, but this was a natural event. It was shocking and it is kind of sad for those of us who were wanted them to see them do well. Um, but um, there might have been some situations, I think, where we might have considered it, and those would have been. And so right now, I think the window is closed probably because Iris and Stanley are spending a lot less time on the nest even today. So I think if something like that was going to be attempted, it would have had to been the first day or so immediately after the last egg. There's a lot of just logistical problems. I don't know, since this is the only camera we have up, I don't know where there are other eggs of appropriate age that we could have grabbed. And also ethically, I just have a problem with going and taking eggs or chicks from other pairs that are doing fine. If there had been a problem, for example, if, say, a nest blew down or the storm killed the parents, or one of the parents was electrocuted or something like that, and we knew that there were eggs or young chicks that would die otherwise, and there was Iris and Stanley at that appropriate time, that's perhaps when we could have done something like that. The other thing is that just to let people know that as scientists, we're not allowed to just run around and do that kind of stuff. These are protected species. We're covered by lots and lots of permits to do this research, federal, state, university permits. And so if we were to do things like that, translocating or moving chicks and eggs around, we'd have to get special permission to do it. It's not something that we can just sort of play God, so to speak, and go out and do it. So and Charles, you and I have, and Holly, we've talked about this before. We have a policy of we will intervene, and we have in the past at this nest when there are problems, but that we don't consider them natural problems. They're sort of human-caused problems. So a few years ago, many of you might remember that Hook, who was a young chick, had a fish hook embedded in his leg, and was all tangled up with monofilament fishing line, and he would have died from that. And so we figured that was not a natural event. That was something, ospreys aren't used to, didn't evolve with monofilament fishing line, nor did they evolve with polypropylene baling twine, which is a huge problem. And so we do intervene in cases like that where birds are at risk of being killed because of human-caused problems. Um, and that's also, I mean, the bigger picture, that's one of the reasons we're so concerned about mercury. This is a human-caused pollutant, and we know it's probably killing a lot of osprey eggs, embryos, and so we're trying to do something about that, clean up the environment, basically, so that ospreys can do what they do best, which is try to bring off chicks in the face of natural variability in the environment.
Great. Thanks a lot, because it's been a really hot topic that people have been talking a lot
Yeah.
about. We're about 15 minutes away from the end of this, and I just wanted to remind people you're talking to Dr. Erick Greene. We still got some time to take questions. We've been talking a lot about the past and the present, I feel like, for the bulk of this hour. And it might be time to talk a little bit more, I should say, about the future. We have a few questions both about the nest as well as sort of some larger questions. And so, what about this failure? What do you think, from your perspective, are they less likely to come back to this nest now that it's associated with a failure in the nest?
Yeah, again, that's a great question, and I don't know. I suspect they will come back. I certainly hope so. Their attachment, especially Iris's attachment to this nest, is profound. She's been breeding at this site her whole life. Well, she's been here 8 years on this platform, but before that, for at least 4 years, just a few hundred yards away. So if she survives the winter, I strongly suspect she'll be back. And just bear in mind, she's an old bird right now. She's probably 15, 16 years. There are records of birds living, ospreys living 20, 25 years, but she's a grand dame in the osprey world, and she's a remarkable bird. Some year she won't come back because she will have died. We don't know how old Stanley is. He might be a lot younger. The first year he showed up, he was really scrappy, and I kind of thought he was an old codger just because he looked in such rough shape. But he was probably a young bird then. He might have been an older bird whose mate had died, and so he was looking around for an unattached female, or he may have been a younger bird who hooked up with Iris. We don't know. But they've been together now for a number of years and done really, really well. And as we saw just a few days ago, and even today, they're still he's still feeding her and bringing fish, and and so I suspect that, and I hope that they'll be back next year if they both survive the winter. I don't. We know other ospreys that fail, have nest failures. They do come back the following year. So I think they'll be back. I hope they'll be back.
Great. I'm gonna come back to that winter aspect because a lot of people are interested in where they might be going. But before we get there, just a couple more questions about the nest. One, could we have put a cover on that nest which would protect them from future incidents like this? And two, given that they won't be continuing to build up the nest this year, is there a danger of it falling into disrepair and such that they won't want to use it next year?
All right. So the cover idea, yeah, a lot of people have raised that. No, for a couple reasons. First of all, ospreys really don't like to nest in places where there's stuff over them. They like, and so with natural nests, they choose to build on snags that don't have anything over the nest, really. Other birds will build nests. Other raptors build nests that they like to have them concealed and a lot of stuff over them. But ospreys really don't like things over the nest. And so I suspect that, if we did put a cover over the nest, it would actually make the nest site less attractive to them. And that might cause them to choose another site. There is an unoccupied osprey platform right around the corner. It's not the direction of the owl pole, but the other way. And it's just about just a couple hundred yards up the river. So there's a nice platform just sitting right around the corner. And so I wouldn't consider putting up a cover because, first of all, I don't think they'd like it. I don't think, also, if you think about it, it wouldn't have protected them from this event because that hail was basically coming in sideways. So we'd have to, a cover to be effective, would have to be pretty high over the nest, and the hail would have got them anyway. The other thing that really concerns me about having structures close to the nest is just putting them at more risk when they're flying in and out. It's just more, to hold the cover up, you'd need a bunch of things to hold it up, metal poles and stuff, and that's just putting them at more risk to, break their wings or something. And that would be a particularly big risk for the chicks because when they're just learning to fly, they spend a lot of, they're not very good at it at first. They're pretty goofy. They spend a lot of time at first with the flapper size, jumping up and down, and then flying off and flying back. So they do, for about a month, they're flying in and out of the nest. And for a while, they're doing their best, but they're not nearly as good as the adults at negotiating tight spaces. So I think if we did put a cover on the nest, it would actually, we might end up killing chicks that way. So so the answer is no for all those reasons.
Great. And then the issue about the nest possibly falling into disrepair, would that be a big
Yes.
turnoff for the ospreys?
No. As you've seen, Stanley, he does a whole bunch of stuff well. He brings in the monster fish really well. The other thing he's really good at is interior decorating. So Stanley is, and Iris both, Stanley just loves to bring in sticks and rearrange the furniture. And so every year in the spring, the nest is pretty in kind of rough shape. Over the winter, it gets flattened, wind blows stuff off of it, and so part of the sort of ritual and pair bonding and sort of courtship stuff in the spring I think it's a very important part of the whole early pre-breeding behavior is renovating and refurbishing the nest. So it's still a great nest. It didn't blow off in the windstorm. It's still about 3 feet thick or more. And so the fact that, it might be in a little bit of disrepair. It was pretty shabby at the beginning of this season. And you saw right away, they built it up about 6-8 inches with new stuff. So I have no concern that they'll be turned off by the condition of the nest. If anything, it'll give Stanley some more things to practice his good sense of feng shui on.
Well, and speaking of their nest building prowess, this question's come up quite a bit about frustration nests or sort of displaced new nest building behavior sort of coming out of the failure of their current nest. And I don't know if you'd care to comment some on whether or not you think that might be a likely follow-up to the nest failure.
Yeah, I don't think so. I haven't seen it. They're not bringing sticks in anywhere else, and I've never seen that in ospreys, frustration nests or building different nests. They will build nests surprisingly quickly in cases where the nest they want to be is occupied by something else. And around here, that's mainly Canada geese in the spring. So, we have had a lot of issues, probably about, in some places around here, 30 to 50% of the nests have Canada geese nesting on them early in the spring. And the Canada geese start nesting before the ospreys get back. And it may seem hard to believe, but if the ospreys get back to their nest and there's Canada geese on them, the ospreys cannot get those geese off. The geese are real ornery. and they'll stand their ground and do some damage to the ospreys. And so those of you who live here in Missoula, you know that a couple seasons ago at the Osprey Baseball Diamond, which is the next nest down the river, there was a pair of geese on it, and that pair ended up building, I guess you could call them frustration nests, but they couldn't use their nest that they had built and were used to for many years, and they built a new nest really quickly up on a 100 kilovolt power line. And so it got us really concerned because there was a lot of juice running through these live wires just a few inches from the sticks. And so we spent a lot of time actually giving that nest a haircut, trimming off branches. I didn't do that, but people with who are certified to do that went up and were making sure that no sticks were getting anywhere close to touching those lines. But that's the only situation that I've seen ospreys build other nests.
Great, thanks a lot. We're coming up towards the end of the hour here, and I wanted to maybe ask you a couple of relatively quick questions.
Sure.
And give you a chance to sum up with any kind of outgoing statement for all the fans watching today. One has to do with the eggshells that were in the nest. And is there going to be any effort by the Montana Osprey Project to recover any of the eggshells to test for any of the contaminants or anything, or eggshell thickness or anything like that, in sort of the follow-up to this unfortunate happening?
Yeah, if we do go up to the nest, we'll go up to the nest eventually to clean off the camera and do some just sort of routine maintenance. And if I do see eggshells up there, I'll grab them. We're not measuring eggshell thickness. We're not collecting eggs as part of this study, and we also know that eggshells aren't thin now. That was a problem with DDT. It would cause eggshell thinning, which was the problem back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. But right now, the mercury doesn't cause eggshells to get thin, for example. So it's not something we're looking at. But we don't measure, or we can't measure the contaminants in the eggshells. So the answer to that is no.
Okay, great. And I'll let people follow along on the Osprey Cam Facebook page to learn more about where it's likely these birds go, because you guys post lots of great content there about the satellite transmitter studies.
Yeah.
I did want to follow up with one thing that had to do with, you'd mentioned the building site and how the camera's going to be left on, at least, probably to view the progress there. And does the failure of this nest change anything relative to how they're going to be working, number one? And also, does it change anything about how you might approach doing some of the upgrades that have been talked about in the past with infrared illuminators potentially, or a new perch? If you wouldn't mind touching on those two things, and then it'll be just about time to wrap.
Yeah, great questions. So the construction won't change, and the reason is that from the very get-go, the company has been remarkable. They're called Jackson Construction Company. It's a local company here in Missoula. They've been fantastic. They have planned out the entire sort of schedule of construction around this nest and around Iris and Stanley. So the hard work of planning for them has already been done. And so, no, their plans will not change because they've already planned around them. Let me just grab, it's really impressive. This is the Jackson Construction schedule, and I know you can't see any of this, but this is a construction schedule for the next 3 years, showing all the different phases of the construction progress. And all of these this is a timeline, and these are events that'll happen in the construction process. And a lot of that is the way it is because of this nest. So they don't have to change anything because of this. And that's been really remarkable. I think the company deserves a lot of credit for that. We will be down the road making improvements to the nest, and we've been waiting because um, we need basically more power and a larger, um, a more powerful data port. So to do the sorts of things we want to do. But down the road, we want to put an infrared illuminator on it so we can watch at night. We didn't have the power at this pole to do it, and it would have cost us about $10,000 or $20,000 to do it. But we are planning on doing that, and we're still hoping to put up a perch so that Stanley has something nearby to sit on. We almost did it this year, but we didn't. We decided not to just because we weren't sure whether they would accept the construction. And we thought that one more change at the nest might have been too much for them. But down the road, we are planning on making these changes, improvements.
Great, Eric. That's a great summary. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to say to the viewers today. When I checked in at the start, I haven't had a chance to look, but there were over 500 people listening and watching. And I just wanted to give you a chance, since I've been the one peppering you with questions for the last 40 minutes, to maybe say something that I wasn't asking you to say.
Yeah, well, hello to all you 500 folks out there. And I just have to say that thank you so much for being such fantastic Osprey fans. And I've been humbled and amazed and astounded. When we first put up this camera, I was more or less, I had to be sort of dragged kicking and screaming into the world of social media. But Holly and others and Charles have taught me the error of my ways, and you folks, just with your passion and interest, it's been very, very humbling and encouraging and satisfying as a research scientist to know that this camera is reaching so many of you in important ways. And also, let me just say that, so Iris and Stanley are an older established pair, and they've been really doing well. They've suffered this setback this year, but I will be posting a lot more information on another really, I think, terribly exciting event, which is, it looks like Rapunzel is now sitting on eggs. And she's the bird with the satellite transmitter that we've been following for the last 4 years. We've found a nest. It's a natural snag nest. It's not on a platform. It's way off in the mountains. We thought she might have died because the satellite points were coming from the same place, not moving, and we were worried she had died, but it turns out it looks like they're not moving because she may be incubating. So I'll be posting more information, and it sort of bookends this kind of sad event that here we've got a young female osprey who it looks like she's breeding for the first time. And this will be the first time in North America, if this is true, that a bird with a satellite transmitter, I think, has been followed from being a chick to starting breeding. That it may not be true, but it's certainly the first case in our study. So I'll be posting more information on that really, really cool development.
That's great. Thank you so much, Eric. And again, you'll be able to follow everything about that via their Facebook page, the Montana Osprey Cams. You can just search for it. You don't have to be a member of Facebook to even go there and read it. So I encourage everybody to go check that out and follow along. There's still a lot to learn from this camera and through this collaboration with Montana Osprey Cams and the Cornell Lab. And I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Holly, who's our BirdCams communications specialist, who's been ferrying me questions during this to share with Eric, and also to Jamie, who works out in Montana with Eric, who has helped this year a great deal with both the online communities and providing additional information. There's a good chance, she said she was interested anyway, there's a good chance that she's going to be potentially creating a podcast that will use some of the content from this question and answer, as well as digging into some of your additional questions that we weren't able to get to. I'm sorry we can't just have a long, afternoon-long hangout session where we all just chat and discuss ospreys all day. It actually sounds like a really fun time to me. But with that, I want to wish everybody a great weekend and just say you can follow along on the Facebook pages. You can sign up for e-news. We have a link on the Osprey Cam page if you want to get updates about new cams, or we send out We do send out messages when our cams start up again. I want to mention that we have a great crew of volunteers this year who have been helping move the cam around, as well as posting stuff to Twitter to keep everybody updated. And if that's something you're interested in for future years, please get in touch with us. You can always drop us an email at birdcams@cornell.edu. And lastly, I mentioned this right at the top of the hour, but we will be planning to post this whole question and answer in its entirety online for you to share with your friends or to come back to as a reference. And hopefully, as I said, there'll be an even more in-depth podcast that Jamie can help make happen in the future. So thanks, everybody, for sitting and learning with us today. I always learn a great deal from my conversations with Eric, and I usually spend most of my time smiling. So thank you for another great experience, Eric. Looking forward to however this might turn out in the future. And wishing Stan and Iris happy hunting and great tailwinds on their migration.
Yeah, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Charles and Holly, and all the camera operators and tweeters. You've been great.
Great. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'll be restarting the cam feed, so just give it a couple seconds here, and we'll be up and running again. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.